Excuse me. Thank you, Georgette. I appreciate it. I appreciate the invitation to be here today. Everybody that's watching virtually, thank you for joining us. Thank you all for being here, getting up on this cold morning, and everybody that really worked hard to put this event together. It's a beautiful church, as Georgette mentioned earlier. So, yes, I'm here to speak about my sister. Georgette just said, let's get the party started. Well, it's not a whole lot of fun speaking about this issue, imposed death, and what happened to my sister. And it's been 17 years now, almost. This March will mark 17 years since Terry died. And as Georgette mentioned, that's really what brought me into the pro-life movement, so to speak, advocating for people with disabilities and all those other medically vulnerable individuals. So what I want to do today, why am I here? Terry's case. Why am I still talking about Terry's case? Well, unfortunately, the reason I still talk about Terry's case and why our family started the Terry Schiavo Life and Hope Network is because what happened to Terry is happening every single day in our healthcare system and really globally. And I don't think a lot of people understand this and what I'm going to describe here today and what is happening and how much of treatment decisions have been now shifted essentially into the hands of healthcare providers, of doctors, ethics committees, and others that are making these denial of treatment, withdrawal of treatment decisions rather than family members. So essentially strangers are making decisions how we are to treat our loved ones. And as I said, I don't know how many people really understand how much of our medical liberties have been lost. And that's what I'm here to talk about today, and that's why we're still talking about Terry's case and how many other people it's affecting on a daily basis. There is so much focus on the abortion issue, which understandably so. But because there is, this issue for the most part is going rather unnoticed. And maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but not far. You're going to have a speaker here later on today, Wesley Smith, he's a wonderful speaker. I hope you stay and you'll be here to listen to him. And he's really been sounding the alarm. Wesley's been a real blessing for this movement because he's really been sounding alarm for a long time on really kind of reading the tea leaves 20, 30 years ago and predicting much of what's happening today at that time, unfortunately. So I just want to talk a little bit about Terry's case because it has been so long, and again, what we're kind of confronted with today and why we need to be a little more vigilant and a little more, we need to really focus and do what we can to try and help these people that are really under attack. Their dignity is under attack just as much as the unborn child. So it really all started in 1990. Our whole family was living in Florida, and I could be up here for the next 2-3 hours talking about Terry's case, and it would still not cover really just how just everything that this case was. Something that came completely unexpected to my family, unanticipated. But in 1990, we're all living in Florida. We grew up just outside of Philadelphia. My dad kind of semi-retired. We moved to Florida. Terry was 26 years old. She was married to Michael Schiavo at the time for about, I believe it was about 6 years, February 25th, 1990. They were in their apartment, and Terry was, as far as we knew, I saw her earlier that day, that she was physically fine. She experienced some type of collapse, some type of accident, and I was actually living in the same apartment complex, so my father called me after Michael Schiavo called my dad, and I was there within minutes, and when I entered into their apartment, Terry was lying on the floor, struggling to breathe, and I wasn't all that concerned. I thought she had just fainted because I had saw her earlier, and there was no kind of warning that something as serious like this would happen. But nevertheless, as soon as I got there, I kind of reached down and shook Terry's shoulder and said, "Come on, Terry, get up." And she was unresponsive. It was just then that the paramedics got there, and when they started to attend Terry, I knew there was something seriously wrong. They within seconds, they hit her with the defibrillators, and I think they did it probably at least a half a dozen times to try to get her heart started. She had no pulse. Nonetheless, they worked on her for about a half hour, finally got her stable enough to take her to the hospital. Didn't think she was going to survive the first 24, 48 hours. But what happened from this collapse, she went several minutes without oxygen, and from that she sustained a very serious brain injury. And at first, as I said, we didn't know if she was going to live or die, but she did survive. And just to kind of fast forward, at first she was hooked up to machines, all type of help, medical help to keep her living. But it was soon, within a month's time, even before that, where the only thing sustaining her was a feeding tube, food and water. She had difficulty swallowing because of her brain injury, and she needed a feeding tube to deliver her food and hydration, something that's very common today. Last report I saw, there's upwards of at least 1 million people that need feeding tubes, either for a temporary period of time or something more permanent, because they have difficulty swallowing and need help to receive their nourishment. But nevertheless, Terry needed a feeding tube, and she was getting rehabilitation for the first couple of years. And I mention this because it's all important, because what happened subsequent to Terry's collapse. But she was receiving rehabilitation. She was starting to respond. She was starting to form words. These are all in her medical documents. She was actually starting to speak. She still had a serious disability, but nevertheless, we were very encouraged by her improvement. So this was about between 1990 and 1992. 1993, Michael had a change of heart. He started living with another woman. There was a lot of money involved from a medical trust fund that was established for Terry by Michael, close to $1 million. And Michael decided that he was going to pursue to end my sister's life. And this all began in 1993. And that's really what started this battle between Michael Shivo, who was her guardian. There was no advance directive that was written. There was no way to know what Terry's wishes were. But nevertheless, Michael went on this really pursuit to end her life. And it started in 1993. Our family was doing everything we could to stop him. Fast forward to 1998, Michael, he was trying unsuccessfully to end Terry's life by denying her antibiotics that would have killed her. He was unable to do that. So he went to the Florida court and he asked for permission from the court to remove her food and hydration. Our family objected. It went to trial in 2000. And some of you might know this if you've been following Terry's case, but it went to a Florida Circuit Court in 2000. There was a week-long trial. The judge came back. So Michael, he went to the court, he petitioned the court based on two things. That Terry was not going to recover from her brain injury, that she was in a persistent vegetative state, and also, unbeknownst to our family, that these wishes surfaced close to 8 years, 10 years later, that Terry made this alleged verbal wish that she wanted to die. And this was the first time we were hearing this. As I said, 8 years, it was 9 years later, almost a decade later. And Michael went to the court with this. So there's a week-long trial, and Michael testified that Terry made these alleged wishes, and that she was in this condition, that she was never going to improve. So the court, after the trial finished, the judge came back a couple weeks later with the ruling that he was going to give Michael permission to remove her food and hydration. This was in 2000. Our family got involved in a protracted legal battle for the next 5 years, and during that time, it started to grow in publicity. It started as a very local case in St. Petersburg, Florida, and then by 2005, it grew into an international case where not only did the Florida legislature get involved, Governor Bush got involved, it actually went up to Congress, the United States, President Bush got involved. This also reached the Vatican, Pope John Paul was involved. We had millions of people all over the world that were supporting our family's efforts. And there was even celebrities involved, not that that really matters, I guess, but there are some pro-life celebrities that were coming out in support of Terry's life. But nonetheless, on March 18th, 2005, with some of these most powerful people in the world trying to support Terry's life, her feeding tube was removed, and our family had to sit by and for almost 2 weeks walk into a room and watch my sister slowly die by dehydration and starvation. So, and I'll talk more about that a little later and kind of the lies that exist. So I talk about all these people that support us and these, President Bush and Governor Bush and so many people probably even here today that were supporting my family's efforts. But nonetheless, we're unsuccessful. And I think that kind of gives you a barometer or a sense of what we're up against today in this death movement, this death agenda, that they were successful to end my sister's life despite all the support that we were receiving. And our family never expected that Terry's feeding tube was ever going to be removed, particularly with Michael's conflicts of interest at the time that he petitioned the court to end her life. But nonetheless, we failed, and Terry died by this slow and very inhumane death by dehydration and starvation. And I wish there was more time. I could talk about more of the details of Terry's case. We do have a website, terryshivo.org, where you can read more about her case and the specifics, and our family's, well, it turned out to be a 12-year battle. And there's also a book downstairs that our family wrote. It's free. Feel free to take one today with you. And that really gives you a lot of the details of what our family was really confronted with, trying to save my sister's life. And, you know, I talk about all these people and these groups that are supporting us, but one of the institutions that was not supporting us, and I know this is going to shock you, was the mainstream media. Our family learned from back when this was happening in the 2000s, that the media was not our friends. And again, we were so naive, we had no idea. We were just an ordinary family that was faced with trying to defend my sister, who we were fully prepared and wanting to care for her in her condition, whether she was going to improve or not. But nonetheless, we learned very quickly that the media was really biased and taking the side of Michael, who was doing everything he could to end her life, unfortunately. We did have some friends in the media, but they were mostly coming from the conservative point of view, but for the most part, the mainstream media was doing everything they can to support Michael's efforts. So why are we still here today? Well, eugenics, unfortunately, euthanasia, is something that we've been dealing with for a long time. In fact, it's getting worse. It's getting much worse than it was even back when my sister was killed. And what do I mean by what's happened to Terry is happening every single day? Well, it is. And what I mean by that is feeding tubes, which were once considered ordinary and basic care, are now considered medical treatment. And because of this, depending on the state law, it can be rather easy to either deny or withdraw someone a feeding tube, even if they have expressed wishes that they want it, because it's now considered medical treatment rather than ordinary and basic care. And if there's one thing that you can take with you today, it would be that, because many people don't realize that medical treatment is looked upon right now as any other basic, is looked upon now as medical treatment. So because of this, so many medically vulnerable are now subjected to having it withdrawn or removed because it's defined this way. Incidentally, the Catholic Church and other Christian communities do not recognize feeding tubes as medical treatment, but still as ordinary and basic care. And such, we are obligated to give people or provide people food and hydration through a feeding tube if they are not dying and they're able to assimilate it or metabolize it. But that's just one thing. Feeding tubes are just one thing that has been shifted or changed in our culture today that works to give this eugenics movement, this pro-death movement, the tools to be able to end people's lives. Wesley Smith, who is coming here, as I mentioned a little later today, he said this a long time ago. He said, once killing, and this is very profound, I mention this every time I speak for the most part. He said, once killing is accepted as an answer to human difficulty and suffering, the power of sheer logic dictates that there is no bottom. And he's right. Once you accept killing as an answer to suffering, where does it end? Well, it doesn't. And that's what we're seeing today because it's become so prevalent in our culture and our healthcare. And as I said, because of that, we are really confronted with it becoming more and more difficult to get the treatment that we want for our loved ones. So what I'm talking about today, this eugenics movement, is nothing new to to the USA. In fact, this might surprise some of you. Let me just read. I wrote this not too long ago. I said, prior to my sister's predicament, the biases that existed towards persons with disabilities had been invisible to me, and it was. Since then, I have come to learn the dark history of the deadly discrimination towards persons with disabilities. Indeed, some 20 years prior to the Germany's T4 eugenics movement, where upwards of 200,000 German citizens were targeted and killed because of their physical or mental disabilities, the United States was experiencing its own eugenics movement. And this is prior to the eugenics movement in Germany, so we're talking about prior to the 1940s. U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas documented some of the history in his concurring opinion in Box v. Planned Parenthood of Indiana and Kentucky. Justice Thomas describes how eugenics became part of the academic curriculum being taught in upwards of 400 American universities and colleges. It was not only race that was a target of U.S. eugenics movement. Eugenicists also targeted the institutionalized due to incurable illness, the physically and cognitively disabled, the elderly, and those with medical dependencies. So the eugenics movement was alive and well back, as I said, back in the 1930s. And since that time, although we did put a lot of safety nets, so to speak, in place to protect the medically vulnerable, those safety nets are slowly eroding. So let me just read some things to you. I can't go into giving you explanations of all these because it would take too long. But all I'm mentioning here today and I'll give a brief explanation, but these are all have now fallen into these are tools now that this movement can use, doctors, physicians can use to end people's lives. We have feeding tubes being redefined as medical treatment, which I already mentioned. We have DNRs, which are also, you might be familiar with DNRs, do not resuscitate orders. They are now being placed on people unbeknownst to families. And once you have a DNR placed on you, it basically means it's like no more treatment is what it equates to. They can potentially be very dangerous. Terminal sedation. Terminal sedation basically is giving someone morphine to help with their pain, which is a good thing. But once you start terminal sedation, there's no way of knowing if your loved one is receiving enough morphine to kill them. Futile care. Futile care policy is something that the hospital will label a person with. And once they decide that someone is a futile care patient, the next thing they will do is stop their treatment. These are hospital policies that are now in place. Persistent vegetative state, I mentioned earlier, they diagnosed my sister as being in a PVS. This gives authority to the hospital and the courts to end a person's life because of a persistent vegetative state diagnosis, which is a brain injury, which incidentally, the PVS is misdiagnosed almost 40% of the time. So almost half of the time, the PVS diagnosis that is diagnosed on a patient is misdiagnosed, but yet they're using it to kill that patient based on a diagnosis that's wrong almost half the time. Brain death. Once they diagnose someone as being brain dead, the next thing they do is take steps to end the person's life. It doesn't matter if the family wants time to see if the person can recover. Personhood theory, which I'm going to talk about in a second. Personhood theory is basically defining someone as a human person, non-person. So if you are no longer a person, a human non-person under this personhood theory, doctors can end your lives. Ethicists can end your lives. Ethics committees are in place in hospitals to determine if a patient should continue to receive care. They're in for the most part, in every hospital. Ethics committees will now decide if treatment should be stopped. The adoption of situational ethics, I think that's self-explanatory. Depending on the situation, they can decide if they want to continue care. Pulse and MOLS forms. Pulse forms are physician orders of life-sustaining treatment or medical orders of life-sustaining treatment. They will give these to you to sign when you go into a hospital. Once you do, these can be very dangerous. Again, they put decision-making abilities or capabilities in the hands of a physician rather than family members. Assisted suicide, I think we're all familiar with assisted suicide. Abortion as it relates to Down syndrome, once they decide someone has a disability, which I know there are a lot of false positives, mothers and families decide to end their lives. And then we have COVID-19. COVID-19 has, in a sense, exposed what many of us in this movement have already been dealing with, and that is reasons and decisions that are being made to end a person's life. And we've been getting inundated with calls from families that are having their visitation stopped. They don't know what treatment their loved one is getting or not getting, all under this umbrella of COVID-19, which has become very dangerous for the medically vulnerable because of what they're doing now, basically to make decisions without families even knowing. So these are just, and again, I know I'm throwing a lot at you today, but these are things that I don't think any of us really know out there in the public that all can be used to end a person's life, and we are powerless. I can't tell you, our family with the foundation that we started, Life and Hope Network, how many families have called us in crisis that are being told no. They want treatment, they want time to see if their loved one can recover, and they're being told no, and there's not much they can do. The only way they have a chance of stopping it is when they reach out and we help them, and most times the best that we help them is getting legal advice. And once an attorney gets involved, then all of a sudden it seems to me that the hospital starts to cooperate with the family. Now, I don't want to paint all doctors and the medical professional as being of this mindset, but it seems to me that we're trending in this direction. We work with a lot of wonderful doctors, and there's facilities out there that still seem to respect the dignity of the life. But more and more, it seems to me that hospitals and doctors are not looking at the best interests of the patient, but rather the best interest of the hospital. And this is all, if I had to kind of sum this up, why is this happening? And again, I don't think this shocks you. It's all cost containment. Decisions are being made rather than treat somebody or end their life based on their cost. If someone's going to take a long time to recover, but rather they can end their life quicker, it saves the hospital, depending on the situation, can save the hospital a significant amount of money. So that's what's kind of driving these decisions, insurance companies behind a lot of these decisions. So I just want to talk two things. I know I'm getting a little short on time, but two things. I talk about this personhood theory and why it's so dangerous. And Wesley, and this is being taught to our students, our future medical students, and that now are practicing medicine, because this has been going on. If you ever heard of Peter Singer, these ethicists have been teaching this stuff in our schools for probably 20, 30 years now. You could probably ask Wesley, he probably knows how much, if it's longer than that. But this is what's being taught in our schools, our medical schools, in ethics classes. It's a personhood theory. It's a real thing. And Wesley wrote about this in 2002, 20 years ago, and he called it the New Grim Reapers, practitioners of bioethics say who should live and who should die. Let me just read this. Quote, bioethicists often assert what counts morally is not being human, but being a person, a status earned by possessing identifiable mental capabilities such as being self-aware or having the ability to engage in rational behavior. While the exact criteria for determining who is and who is not a person are still being debated, most bioethicists agree that there are human beings who are not persons. So who are they, Wesley asked. Generally, such unfortunates include all embryos and fetuses because they are not capable of rational thought. But other forms of human life, such as infants up to, I think, 2 or 3 years of age, are also denigrated as non-persons for the same reason, because they have no awareness of time. Other designated human non-persons include advanced Alzheimer's patients, people with serious cognitive disabilities like my sister, such as the comatose and those in near coma. At the same time, some bioethicists, and this is where it gets really weird, says Wesley, believe that intelligent animals, particularly chimps, apes, dogs, dolphins, elephants, and pigs, are persons. According to this view, these animals, persons, have greater moral value than do human non-persons. This means that some animals should be treated with greater respect than some people are. This is real. There was an article not that long ago, but I think it was Students for Life came out, and they did, and the headline was, "College students defend killing 2-year-olds because I cannot communicate with it." So this stuff is taking hold, so to speak. Every time I speak, it seems to me, I speak at medical schools or law schools, students will come up to me afterwards and say, because I always bring, I basically read what Wesley writes and explain person theory, and they come up to me and they say, you know what, Mr. Schindler, you're absolutely right. This is being taught in our ethics classes, which is very scary because, again, it's becoming a new world war. This radicalism, this extremism is becoming a worldview and how we're treating and really showing no regard for the dignity of human life. The last thing I want to talk about is, and that our language too has been hijacked. We have a new meaning for what suffering means, right? We have a new meaning what it means to die with dignity, and that's kind of what I want to talk about. We need to, and we all know this with the abortion issue. These issues they're intertwined. The same people and groups that are doing their best to convince us it's okay to kill the unborn child are also working to end the lives of our medically vulnerable. So when my sister was being starved and dehydrated to death, they were coming out and they would tell you, and you can read articles about how they will describe this as a peaceful and painless way to die. Let me explain. Walking in and watching my sister die this way is completely contrary to the narrative out there. And you can read headlines where they'll describe dying as peaceful and painless. Michael Shiva's attorney came out about a week and a half, about 10 days into Terry's death, this way, and gave a press conference in front of millions of people and said that he never saw Terry look so beautiful when she was dying from dehydration and starvation. Let me just read to you. I finally, in 2010, I believe, or I think it was 2015, I finally released a picture of my sister, and I gave kind of a graphic detail of what it was like to walk into a room and watch my sister die this way, because I was getting tired of the narrative out there and all the lies that were being said about my sister and this death. And let me just read to you what I wrote. And this was printed on lifenews.com. You can pull this up. I said, "These are the hard facts my family and I will have to live with for the rest of my life. After almost 2 weeks without food or water, my sister's lips were horribly cracked to the point where they were blistering. Her skin became jaundiced with areas that turned different shades of blue. Her skin became markedly dehydrated from the lack of water. Terry's breathing became rapid and uncontrollable as she was outside running, outside sprinting. Her moaning at times was raucous, which indicated that to us the insufferable pain she was experiencing. Terry's face became skeletal, with blood pooling in her deeply sunken eyes, and her teeth and her teeth protruding forward. Even as I write this, I can never properly describe the nightmare of having to watch my sister have to die this way. What will be forever seared in my memory is a look of utter horror on my sister's face when my family visited her just after she died. Excuse me. You know, it's almost 17 years, and it's still, when I read this, thank you, Georgette, it's still hard to read, and I apologize. Those pushing this agenda will certainly deny this. They have to, but there was a reason the court ordered that no cameras or videos be permitted in Terry's room while she was being killed. They claim privacy issues. My family knows otherwise, and they do too. So when will this heartlessness end? When will the lies end? When will the American people decide that these injustices have to stop? When will we stop placing our hope in our leaders, politicians, judges, doctors, the clergy, and anyone else we think will end this insanity? It's up to us. We must advocate for our loved ones. Because of the changes in, as I said, as I explained here today, in a rather quick way, it comes to us to be our advocates for our loved ones. There is no doubt, and you all know this with the abortion issue, we are in a spiritual warfare. How we are going to treat our most vulnerable should never be in question, despite what seems to be a growing number of people who no longer respect the dignity of the human person, and more significantly, the gospel and the teachings of Christ, denying his absolute truth. We decide who it will be we will serve. We must evangelize the good news of Jesus Christ. All of our faith must be put in Christ. It is only he who is worthy of all our praises and all of our honor. So thank you. Again, I'm sorry, I know I was talking rather quickly. If you go to lifeandhope.com, that is our website. You can learn more about this. You can go to our Facebook page. I'm not a big fan of Facebook, but nevertheless, we do use it to get out information, and we do stories. There's come you know, this is a lot of this is it's a tough issue to talk about and to think about. But our family did experience a lot of blessings along the way, even to this day. The supporters and the people that we met, the friends that we made, and the people that were helping through the efforts of Terry Shiva Life and Hope Network, of the families that called us. We've been involved in upwards of 4,000 cases to this point of families that have called us in crisis. They don't always have a good ending, but we at least try to help families that are experiencing the suffering and pain that our family is experiencing, trying to do what we can to protect their loved ones. But as I said, a lot of this comes down to advocacy. We got to understand this issue. We got to understand we have to ask questions. We can push back against doctors that are telling us one thing, and we can ask for second opinions. We can do everything in your power to advocate for your loved ones, because you are the ones looking out for their best interests. It is not always the case in our healthcare today, in this radical worldview that seems to be growing more and more, you know, not just here in the United States, but globally. So if you do experience any problems, or if you are confronted with anything that I'm talking about here today with a loved one, because most likely we're all going to be, at some point in our lives, either ourselves or through a loved one, are going to be confronted with this type of issue, please contact us. We are there to help. We're there to help you and do everything we can to provide at least a chance at getting your loved one the treatment that it is that you're fighting to get for your loved ones that's in these types of situations. So I'll be around here off and on today. So if you have any questions, feel free to come see me. Again, I have books down at the table down there. There's also virtually, if you would like a book, they are free. You can contact Georgette, and she can get a book to you as well. So again, thank you all for being here so much. I really appreciate it, and I thank you for the invitation, Georgette, and enjoy your day. God bless you.